So, class number 42 on the golden doves. I actually want to go back to page 6, um, bottom paragraph. Outside the perimeter of book, people of the book. So we said that Jewish people are the people of the book. Am Yisrael is the people of the book. But outside the context of people of the book, reading is categorically excluded. Why? Why is reading excluded? That's interesting. Continuing, writing becomes graffiti. So if we don't have the perimeter of book, people of the book, then writing is graffiti. Why is that? Why is writing, why does writing become graffiti? And the bookman replaces the man of the book. So instead of the man of the book, which is a person who knows how to read a book or who is, you know, um, um, lives by the book, is loyal to the book, you have a book collector. Why is that? That's the real question we should be thinking about, because that's a very heavy statement. Let's see if we can understand that a little better. In Odo da Fe, novel written by Elias Canetti, Elias Canetti examines the nature of books and the bookman in Western tradition. Okay, so it's a novel, and like any other novel, there's a story. But if the author of the novel is intelligent, then we would like to find an intelligent message in the novel. So the purpose of this novel is to examine the nature of books and the bookman in Western tradition. Kien, the principal character of Odo da Fe, typifies the bookman. Okay. For that was how I saw him, said Canetti, as a bookman, and so intensely that his connection to books was far more important than himself, right? In Odo da Fe, Elias Canetti examines the nature of books and the bookman in Western tradition. Kien, the principal character of Odo da Fe, typifies the bookman. So I think his name is Peter. Peter Kien is a book collector in Vienna, and he's obsessed with books to the extent where he doesn't even have appropriate furniture. He doesn't have appropriate human relationships. His obsession with books is complete. So that's what's meant by the bookman. For that was how I saw him, said Canetti, as a bookman, and so intensely that his connection to books was far more important than himself. These books were written in a language foreign to Kien. These were books that he never read, that he could not read, whose very content was alien, inconsequential, and inaccessible to him and to the world in which he lives. So he has these books. They're beautiful books. They're great books. They're fantastic books, but he can't read them. So that's a bookman in Western tradition. The books were objects to be possessed and protected, not to be read. The books provoke a crisis. Kien, pine wood in German, has combustibility. As a true bookman, he resolves the crisis through cremation. He ends up cremating himself and his books. So that's a mashal for the Western world. We have to think about that. Why? Why is it? So that ties in with the first sentence. Outside the perimeter of book, people of the book, reading is categorically excluded. I think the reason is because only if you have the people of the book who are loyal to the book, who consider the book to be their national symbol, can there actually be a book. Because you take the US Constitution. The United States of America is a republic which is organized according to and pursuant to the authority of the Constitution. But you see, because they're not the people of the book, because they're not loyal to the book, there is no covenant, there is no berit, which binds them to the book. They're taking the Constitution and they're burning it. How do you burn the Constitution? You can do it, you can do so slowly over time by pretending to interpret the Constitution in a way that is a betrayal of the Constitution. Let me explain that. Am Yisrael has a Torah shebe'al peh. We interpret the Torah shebichtav pursuant to the Torah shebe'al peh. This means that we are allowed to read and interpret the text, but that interpretation cannot be a betrayal of the Torah shebe'al peh. So the Torah is entrusted to us, and we must interpret it the Torah shebichtav, that is, and we must interpret it in accordance with the Torah shebe'al peh. That's only possible when you have people of the book, because the interpretation of the book becomes part of the national conscience of the people of the book, and therefore there will never be a betrayal of the book, so long as the people, let me stop right there. The people of the book are, by having the book as a national symbol, not going to betray the book. Of course, there could be betrayals along the way, but we always return back to the book, and we always return back to the Torah shebe'al peh. We've always done that in history. So there's been points where we chose to betray the book, and we chose to betray, but the betrayal was never complete and was never total. We've always returned back, right? The problem, let's say, going to the US Constitution is they are not loyal to the Torah shebe'al peh of the Constitution, because they are not the people of the book. So they feel that it is okay to interpret the Constitution in a way that would be completely foreign to those who gave them the Constitution, those who wrote the Constitution, those who masru lahem the Constitution, and would indeed be a betrayal of the very values that the Constitution was meant to strengthen and fortify. So what happens? When you don't have this loyalty to the book, you end up burning the book. So the US Constitution today has basically been, in a deep sense, burnt. Is it completely, has it disappeared? Perhaps not quite yet. Will America make teshuvah, quote unquote, and return to being loyal to the Constitution? I don't think so. I could be wrong. I'm not trying to make a prediction. It's history will say what happens to the United States. Maybe they will return. I hope they do, because I actually like the United States as it was constituted by the founding fathers. That's my personal proclivity. It's nothing to do with this class, but it's an interesting question, right? It's an interesting question. So loyalty to the book is essential to being able to read the book, because you don't have loyalty to the book, and loyalty to the book means loyalty, being bound to a particular Torah shebe'al peh. If you don't read the book, then you will end up burning the book. And that's what's happening. That's the point of Orah Dafeh. It's very deep, by the way. Unlike the desert of the book, cremation is not a metaphor, a space of dust or ashes, where speech is displayed in total nudity. Right? So we said that Am Yisrael, and as the people of the book, we first went into the desert. Because we went into the desert, we had the white space upon which the book was written. And then we receive the Torah Shebe'al Peh, which is the unique Jewish lens, the lay mental, the mental law through which we process the book. That doesn't mean that we can't have unique interpretations. I said that already, right? Within the context of viewing the Torah Shebichtav through the lenses of the Torah Shebe'al Peh, there are indeed Shivim Panim LaTorah. There are indeed many, many, many various interpretations. There will never be a situation where somebody will read the text and not be able to offer a new interpretation, a new chidush, right? All within that lens. That's the point. Within that lens. That lens is essential. That's what makes us the people of the book. Precisely because we have that lens, we are the people of the book because we are loyal to the book. Because if you don't have that lens, the book will disappear, either explicitly. Maybe they will try to do it explicitly in the United States. I don't know. Maybe they will try to, amend the Constitution out of law. Again, I'm not commenting on whether that is desirable or not desirable. I can only comment as to my personal feelings. And everybody, because this is not a political program. I'm not trying to score political points. I'm just trying to analyze possibilities. I know that the Romans begun to deteriorate as a nation and eventually collapsed as a nation when they became less loyal to Roman law. And when Roman law became kind of like something that was not taken seriously anymore. So you see that again, you see how the only way for a nation to maintain itself as a nation is through the book. So the people of the book support the book, maintain the integrity of the book. The book maintains the integrity of the people of the book. Okay, getting back to the Oro Dafeh, the burning of the book. It is destruction, simple and unabashed, an act in which books and all they represent become the instrument, an object of devastation. It is, I'm reading that again. Why is it? Again, it is destruction, simple and unabashed, an act in which books and all they represent become the instrument and object of devastation. Why does a book become the instrument? I can say it becomes the object of devastation because it's burnt. It becomes the instrument of devastation because it's used to burn. It's very interesting. I think there's something very deep here. The very US Constitution, which is being burnt by these Supreme Court justices who impute to the Constitution things that it clearly doesn't have, that very US Constitution is used as the instrument of destruction. I'm giving this example not because I'm trying to make a political point. Again, I keep saying that because I know it's so easy for people to think, oh, I'm not trying to make a political point. I'm just trying to illustrate something. So a state wants to make a law that it is permissible to abort a baby after the baby is born. I think actually they have something like that. I think they were proposing something like that in Virginia, one of those states. But it doesn't matter. Let's just say that, let's say they have something like that. And then there was a challenge to that law, and the Supreme Court declares that it is a constitutional right of the state to fund such post-birth abortions. Okay. So that's where we're at, I believe, or pretty close to that. Pretty close to that. The word abortion doesn't appear in the Constitution. The Constitution doesn't limit the state's right to limit abortions. The Constitution doesn't insist upon the funding of abortions. And it's all a farce, a clear one at that, right? I mean, we have these back and forth discussions as though we're talking about reality, right? But it's not real, right? So the Constitution becomes the instrument of its own destruction. You understand the irony? They use the Constitution to destroy the Constitution, right? It's really fascinating. So it's very amok, it's very deep. I'm going to read that sentence again. It is destruction, meaning the burning. Simple and unabashed. There's no busha. And, and as unabashed as it is, it's simple. They are burning the Constitution. An act in which books and all they represent become the instrument and object of devastation. It's the instrument. The Constitution is used to destroy, and it becomes itself the object of destruction. It's fascinating. Right. So you see, clauses in the Constitution, they just become graffiti. That's not reading. Nobody's actually reading the words of the Constitution, right? It's just graffiti. You know, they fill it up with particular these, it becomes hieroglyphics, you know, freedom of speech or freedom of assembly, freedom of press, freedom of, right. It really is interesting, isn't it? These are all just slogans. They're political slogans, devoid of meaning. Okay. It is through Kien that Kennedy comes to a personal realization of the desert. A desert that for Kennedy, as for Ya'abes, is self-created. Interesting. So Elias Kennedy, who tells the story of Oro Dafe, says that because of Kien, who is the bookman, he becomes aware of the desert. What's the connection between Kien, the bookman, and the desert? And this desert being a self-created desert, a journey that a person seeking to read words must undergo that journey. I can make a kiss and that's it. Avi, good night.
Did you just say?
All right, sorry about that. It's bedtime. All right, so right, a desert that for Kennedy as for Ya'abes is self-created. Reflecting on Ken's end, he remarked, and I felt my own books drawn into that fate in some incomprehensible way. Says Kennedy, I felt that my books will be drawn into the fate of Oro Dafe. It may have been guilt for permitting Kien to lay hands on books. It may have been justice in having to sacrifice my own books for his. But whatever it was, they denied themselves to me, and I found myself burnt, empty, and blind in my self-created desert. I don't quite understand what Kennedy means by this paragraph, but it's written in the Conscious of Words, which is, I think, one of Kennedy's later writings, and I don't have the book with me, so I obviously can't fully understand what he means when he said, I felt my own books drawn into that fate in some incomprehensible way. Is he saying that in the Western world, now he's writing books and his books are part of, Western literature. Is he saying that ultimately his books will be burned, will become useless because society is changing and they're no longer going to be interested in those books, in those writings? Is that what he's saying? I think so. By us, we're still studying the Mishnayot. We always will study Mishnayot. We always will study Gemara, and so on, right? But I think he understands that if you don't have the people of the book, then you're alone in the desert, right? That's what I think he's saying. Again, it may have been guilt for permitting Kien to lay hands on books. He feels guilty about writing Oro Dafe and having the character in Oro Dafe burn the books. It may have been justice in having to sacrifice my own books for his. Don't know what that means. That Kennedy sacrificed his own books for Kian's books. But whatever it was, they denied themselves to me, and I found myself burnt inside and blind in my self-created desert. Well, at least Kennedy understood, and he was a Sephardic Jew. At least he understood that he was in a desert. I think that's a very Jewish thing, to understand that you're in a desert. That's the beginning of reading. That's the end of the quote. Let's continue. The type of reading characteristic of the bookman reflects the essential monolingualism peculiar to the ancient Greeks and the refusal to become involved in foreign cultures, right? So the bookman in Kennedy's story, he collects books. He doesn't read them, and he can't read them because he doesn't speak the language, or he doesn't read the particular languages. But he loves the books. Arnaldo Momiano has shown that unlike the Hebrews and Romans who learned Greek, the Greeks never had the curiosity to learn any foreign language. We read this yesterday. Monolingual, in my previous class, as it were. Monolingualism appears as an essential trait of the Greek mind. And I was quoting Arnaldo Momiano, a quote. This is one of the manifestations of what we may well call the normal attitude of the Greeks to foreign civilizations as we know it from the time of Homer onwards. Whether Homer was right or wrong in taking the Trojans as Greek speakers is besides the point, right? So Homer viewed the Trojans as they must speak Greek. I mean, just like everybody in Star Trek, all aliens speak English. So Homer understood that the Trojans spoke Greek. Of course they do, right? It doesn't matter whether they actually did or didn't speak Greek. That's besides the point. What matters is that his very humane understanding of conflicts presupposes monolingualism. That's end of the quote by Momiano. The dialogue with the Greeks happened, right, writes Momiano, because the Romans and the Jews wanted it. Interesting. When the Greeks were confronted, so you see the idea of monolingualism. So monolingualism is anti-text, because monolingualism says that there's an objective truth out there, and there's no need to write, because you don't need the text, you need the truth. The writing covers the truth. So you have the truth and you have the writing which covers it. So you don't need writing, or writing has a utilitarian purpose, but it obfuscates. And that's why the Greek philosophers were anti-writing. Anyway, when the Greeks were confronted with a foreign culture, silence or escapism was perhaps the usual reaction, right? So by escapism here, I think it means the failure to actually confront what's actually in front of them, right? This escapism is particularly evident in their literary accounts of the Oriental world and its wisdom. So they enter into this like fantasy-like description of the Orient, which we described yesterday. You know, Chinese eat fortune cookies, and the Chinese wise man speaks about whatever. So it's all just Greek fabrication of what the Chinese really are, right? And we never hear what Chinese are from the Chinese, which is what we should hear it from. Right? Monolingualism finds philosophical expression in Greek metaphysics and Aristotelian logic, because Aristotelian logic, it assumes the Greek language. Aristotelian categories of logic, what's logical for Aristotle is a manifestation of the Greek language. So if you speak a different language, those logical things may not seem so logical anymore. So here we see monolingualism. You have the Greek language, and then you have the Aristotelian categories of logic, which is all connected with Greek metaphysics, which says there is a truth, an objective, real truth out there, which doesn't depend on an observer. Okay. But Greek linguistic peculiarities are confused with universal categories of thought, right? So their particular Greek in the Greek language, there's some peculiarities, like in any language, there are peculiarities, but they confuse these peculiarities for an objective reality, which of course they're not. As Benveniste demonstrated, Emil Benveniste was one of the great Chachami, Chacham, in the Chachmot of Umot HaOlam, although he was a Sephardic Jew himself, incredibly, I don't know how many languages he knew. I mean, just crazy, some crazy number. I think close to 100, if not more. And he says as follows: as Aristotle, reasoning in the absolute, because there's absolute truth. So the truth of Aristotle is absolute, identifying certain fundamental categories of the language in which he thought was actually just a reflection of the language that Aristotle spoke in. Obviously, Aristotle didn't know this, but that's what monolingualism is. So when you're monolingual, you don't understand that you're trapped by the language you speak. And what you consider logical is a derivative of the language you speak. Whereas if you have the Jewish attitude where you're interested in other perspectives, and indeed, like the Sanhedrin, we said have to speak many languages. Why do we care that whether the Hachamim and the Sanhedrin speak many languages? Because you're not trapped by the illusion of language. When you speak many languages, you learn to think from different perspectives and see things differently, and then you understand that would maybe considered an objective reality actually is not an objective reality. It's just a trap of the language that your brain thinks in, right? So when you speak those languages, you understand that. This bears directly on the notion of being, and therefore the whole of Greek metaphysics, which is not grounded on universal canons of human thought, but on a specific quality of the Greek language, right? So, for example, the idea of being or beingness, to be or not to be, right? So the Greeks were obsessed with beingness, ontology. Ontology has to do with beingness, right? You would think this is, so here's, I think this is Emil Benveniste now. Yeah. Emil Benveniste writes about that. Let us emphasize this, the idea of beingness, because it is a linguistic situation, thus characterized that the whole Greek metaphysics of being was able to come into existence and develop, right? So the idea of being has to do not with actual reality. The Greeks thought there was beingness, there was an ontological reality, there was an actual objective reality to famous riddle: if a tree falls in a forest, is there a sound? And the Greek answer will be resounding, absolutely there is sound. It's not a question of perception, right? So that's beingness, things just exist. So Emil Benveniste is saying that's because of the language that they speak. Greek language has the word be, to be or not to be. The language did not, of course, give direction to the metaphysical definition of being. Each Greek thinker has his own, but it made it possible to set up being as an objectifiable notion. It's not that the language says you must believe in beingness. No, it's not like that. But rather the language, the way the structure of the language is organized, allows and leads one to the idea of beingness. So again, but it made it possible, the language made the idea of beingness possible, to set up being as an objectifiable notion, which philosophical thought could handle, analyze, and define, just as any other concept. So the same way you have an atom, or you have fire, you have water, you have solid, you have air, you have beingness. There seems to be a quantum jump here. He was talking about the bookman, and then there's talking about monolingualism. What's the relationship? Because in Greek thinking, things are, things exist. There's no need for interpretation. There's no interaction between the perceiver and the object being perceived. In the bookman also, the books exist, and there's no need to read the books. You see the relationship? Very subtle. In the bookman, you have these books. You don't need to read them. The books exist, and you possess the books. In Greek thinking, objects, things exist. There's a beingness. And the beingness doesn't require interpretation. Doesn't require an interaction with the perceiver. Just like the books don't require a reader. So if the books don't require a reader, what do you have? You have a bookman. If things don't require interpretation, what do you have? You have Greek metaphysics, ontology. See the relationship between the two ideas? Okay, I think we did enough for this lesson.